Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. This love was not just a quiet, hidden affection, but a loud proclamation that everyone in the family could see. Jacob's favoritism was evident in the way he treated Joseph, always giving him the best of everything. This favoritism, evident in the ornate coat he bestowed upon him, a coat of many colors that shimmered in the sunlight, was a symbol of Jacob's deep affection. It was a garment unlike any other, a piece of clothing that set Joseph apart from his brothers, making him stand out in a way that was both beautiful and dangerous. This coat, this symbol of love, bred jealousy amongst his brothers. They could not understand why Joseph was the chosen one, why he was the recipient of their father's undivided attention. Their hearts, once filled with brotherly love, began to darken with envy and resentment. One day they saw their opportunity. The brothers, consumed by their jealousy, began to plot against Joseph. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices low and filled with malice, as they devised a plan to rid themselves of their father's favorite son. Joseph, sent by his father to check on his brothers, found himself stripped of his coat, thrown into a pit. The betrayal was swift and brutal. One moment, he was walking towards his brothers with a heart full of love and trust, and the next, he was lying at the bottom of a dark, cold pit, his beautiful coat torn from his body, and eventually sold to a passing caravan of Ishmaelites. These traders with their camels and goods were heading to Egypt, a land of great wealth and opportunity. To Joseph, however, it was a land of unknowns, a place where his fate would be decided by strangers. The young man, merely a teenager, was taken to Egypt. His journey was long and arduous, filled with the harsh realities of being a slave. The chains that bound him were heavy, both physically and emotionally, as he was led away from everything he had ever known. His world, once filled with the love of his father and the comforts of home, had been reduced to the shackles of slavery. The vibrant colors of his coat were replaced by the dull, cold metal of his chains. The warmth of his father's embrace was now a distant memory, overshadowed by the harsh reality of his new life. He was forced to leave behind everything he knew and everyone he loved. The familiar faces of his family, the laughter of his brothers, even the fields and hills of his homeland, all became part of a past that seemed to slip further away with each step he took. His dreams, his aspirations, seemed to disappear with the dust that billowed behind the caravan as the camels trudged through the endless desert. Each grain of sand that was kicked up seemed to carry away a piece of his hope, leaving him with a growing sense of despair, leaving him with nothing but uncertainty and fear. The future, once bright and full of promise, now seemed dark and foreboding. Every step towards Egypt was a step away from the life he had known, a life that now seemed like a distant dream. The journey to Egypt was long and arduous. The days were filled with the scorching heat of the sun, and the nights brought the biting cold of the desert. Joseph, still reeling from the betrayal of his brothers, had to endure these harsh conditions with little more than the clothes on his back and the chains around his wrists. Joseph, still reeling from the betrayal of his brothers, endured the scorching sun and the biting cold of the desert nights. Each day was a test of his endurance, a challenge to his spirit. The desert, with its vast emptiness, mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. He was treated not as a human being, but as a commodity, an object to be bought and sold. The traders saw him as nothing more than a piece of property, a means to an end. His value was measured in coins, not in the dreams and aspirations that once filled his heart. His spirit, though battered, refused to be broken. Despite the chains, despite the betrayal, despite the harsh conditions, Joseph held on to a glimmer of hope. He believed that his story was not over, that there was a purpose to his suffering. He clung to the belief that God was with him even in this desolate and unfamiliar land. This faith, this unwavering belief in a higher power, gave him the strength to endure, to keep moving forward even when the path ahead seemed impossible. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court. Life took an unexpected turn for Joseph. Though still a slave, he found himself in a position of relative comfort and responsibility. Potiphar, recognizing Joseph's diligence and sharp mind, put him in charge of his entire household. Joseph thrived in this role. He was, by nature, a meticulous and hard-working young man. He managed Potiphar's affairs with such efficiency and care that his master's wealth increased considerably. Potiphar, relieved to have found such a capable and trustworthy servant, entrusted Joseph with every aspect of his household, unconcerned with anything but his own affairs. For a while, it seemed that Joseph had found a semblance of peace and stability in this foreign land. His natural talents, combined with his unwavering faith in God, allowed him to rise above his circumstances. He proved himself to be a man of integrity, his character shining through, even in the darkness of slavery. Little did he know, however, that a far greater trial awaited him, a test that would challenge the very core of his being and his faith. Potiphar's wife was a woman accustomed to getting what she desired. She lived a life of luxury and opulence, surrounded by the finest things that ancient Egypt had to offer. Her beauty was renowned, and her influence within the household was unquestioned. She was used to having servants at her beck and call, and her every whim was catered to without hesitation. Among the many servants, one stood out to her, Joseph. He was not just another servant, he was strikingly handsome, with features that seemed to be chiseled by the gods themselves. His quiet strength and unwavering dedication to his duties made him even more appealing in her eyes. Joseph's presence was magnetic, drawing her attention more and more each day. She began to make advances towards him, her words dripping with honeyed temptation. She would find reasons to be near him, to speak to him in private, her voice soft and inviting. Her eyes would linger on him, filled with a desire that she made no effort to conceal. She was determined to have him, no matter the cost. At first, Joseph politely rebuffed her advances, maintaining a respectful distance. He was aware of the dangerous game she was playing, and he wanted no part of it. But his mistress was persistent, her desire turning into an obsession that would not be denied. Each rejection only fueled her determination, making her more resolute in her pursuit. Day after day, she presented herself to him, her clothing becoming more revealing, her words more suggestive. She would drape herself in the finest silks, her attire leaving little to the imagination. Her attempts to seduce him grew bolder, her advances more blatant. She was relentless, convinced that she could wear down his resistance. She tried to entice him, promising him power and luxury beyond his wildest dreams. She spoke of the wealth and influence he could gain by being with her, painting a picture of a life filled with comfort and ease. She offered him gifts, lavish tokens of her affection, hoping to sway him with the promise of a better future. She appealed to his youth and loneliness, hoping to exploit his vulnerability in this strange land. She knew that he was far from home, isolated from his family and friends. She played on his emotions, trying to create a bond with him to make him feel understood and cared for. She believed that by offering him companionship, she could break through his defenses. But Joseph stood firm, his heart unmoved by her allure. He was steadfast in his principles, guided by a moral compass that refused to waver. Despite the constant temptation, he remained resolute, his integrity unshaken. He knew that giving in would mean compromising everything he stood for. Joseph knew that succumbing to her advances would be a betrayal of the trust that Potiphar had placed in him. He was acutely aware of the consequences of such an act, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. It would mean betraying the man who had given him a chance, who had entrusted him with great responsibility. More importantly, it would be a sin against his God, a violation of the principles that had guided him even in the darkest hours of his slavery. His faith was his anchor, providing him with the strength to resist. He spent many nights in prayer, seeking guidance and fortitude to withstand the trials he faced. He refused to compromise his integrity, choosing instead the path of righteousness, even though it was fraught with danger and uncertainty. Joseph's unwavering commitment to his values was a testament to his character, a beacon of light in a world filled with temptation and moral ambiguity. His decision to stand firm, despite the risks, defined him as a man of true honor and faith. One fateful afternoon, Potiphar's wife made her boldest move yet. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows through the ornate windows of the mansion. The air was thick with tension, a prelude to the storm that was about to unfold. She found Joseph alone in the house, and in a moment of reckless abandon, grabbed hold of his cloak, urging him to lie with her. Her eyes were filled with a dangerous mix of desire and determination, her grip on his cloak tightening as if to bind him to her will. Joseph, caught off guard but resolute in his decision, wrenched himself free, leaving his cloak in her clutches as he fled the house. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the peril he had narrowly escaped. He ran as if the hounds of hell were at his heels. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, each step echoing the urgency of his flight. Outside, the world was a blur, his only thought to put as much distance between himself and the danger behind him. The weight of the moment, the gravity of his decision, settled upon him. He paused, gasping for breath, his mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. The cloak he had left behind was more than just a garment. It was a symbol of his integrity, now in the hands of someone who could twist the truth to her advantage. He had just resisted the most powerful temptation of his life, but at what cost? The fear of retribution loomed large, but so did the knowledge that he had stayed true to his principles. His mind flashed back to the teachings of his youth, the lessons of right and wrong that had been instilled in him. He knew the consequences of his refusal would be severe. Potiphar's wife was not a woman to be scorned lightly. Her influence and power could easily turn his act of righteousness into a tale of betrayal and insubordination. The stakes were high and the outcome uncertain. He was a slave in a foreign land, completely at the mercy of his master. His status offered him no protection, no shield against the wrath that might follow. Yet in his heart, he knew he had made the right choice. The path of integrity was seldom easy, but it was the only path he could walk. As he ran, he clung to the words of his father, the wisdom passed down through generations. His father's voice echoed in his mind, a beacon of guidance in the storm of his thoughts. The stories of his ancestors were not just tales of old, they were the foundation of his very being. The stories of his ancestors, the trials they had faced, and the faith they had shown in the face of adversity. These were the pillars upon which his own faith was built. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not just a distant deity, but a living presence in his life. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had guided his forefathers through their own trials and tribulations. In this moment of crisis, Joseph felt a deep connection to that divine lineage, a sense of purpose that transcended his immediate fears. He had been taught that integrity was more valuable than gold, that the treasures of this world were fleeting compared to the eternal rewards of a righteous life. This teaching was his anchor, holding him steady in the turbulent seas of his current predicament. That faithfulness to God was paramount, a guiding star that illuminated the darkest paths. Even when the cost was high, even when the world seemed to conspire against him, this faithfulness was his compass, pointing him towards the true north of his soul, even when it came at a great personal cost. The path of righteousness was seldom easy, but it was the only path worth walking. Joseph knew that his decision would bring consequences, but he also knew that he could face them with a clear conscience. In that moment of crisis, Joseph chose to honor God, reaffirming his commitment to the values that had been instilled in him. His prayer was not for deliverance from his plight, but for the strength to endure it with grace and dignity, even if it meant facing the wrath of Potiphar and the scorn of the world. He was prepared to stand alone, fortified by his faith and the knowledge that he had done what was right. The world might judge him harshly, but he would not betray his own soul. He had passed the test of loyalty, a test that had challenged the very core of his being. The relief was palpable, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just one battle in a much larger war. But his ordeal was far from over. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the trials he had faced were but a prelude to the challenges yet to come. Yet in his heart, Joseph knew that he would face them with the same unwavering faith that had guided him thus far.